This story took place when I was 19 years old. I am currently 28 and no longer live in the state where this occurred. When I was 19, I worked at a gas station convenience store that was only a few minutes away from my house. I was enrolled in community college, so most of my shifts were evenings or overnights. For the most part, the job was normal and boring. We didn't really get many customers during the later hours, and if we did, they usually pumped their gas, paid with a credit card, and were on their way. I decided to pick up some extra hours during our holiday break from school. I figured I could use the extra cash to get Christmas presents for my family. I was scheduled to work 3 overnight shifts in a row, which was a pain because I always found it difficult to fall asleep when I got home in the morning. The first night of my overnight stretch was going by uneventfully. I was biding my time by restocking the shelves and facing the products that had gaps in them. I remember I was bringing out a big box of cosmic brownies to fill our display case when I heard the bell ring, and someone entered the store. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., so I dropped what I was doing and headed behind the register to assist the person. I hadn't seen them yet, but I called out, "Good evening," to see if I would get a response. I didn't hear anything, so I proceeded to move behind the register to see if the person needed assistance. When I got a glimpse of the person, it appeared to be an elderly woman with dark black hair. Her face was covered in wrinkles, but it was hard to really make out anything else as she was bundled up pretty tightly due to the cold weather. I saw her moving slowly throughout the aisles, not seemingly looking for anything, just walking through the store. After several minutes of watching her, I decided to ask if there was anything I could assist her with. She didn't even bother to look at me or acknowledge that she heard me. She just continued to pace throughout the store. After another 5 minutes or so, she suddenly stopped, stared at the clock above the cooler, turned around, and scampered out the door, disappearing into the night. To be honest, I didn't really think much of it. I assumed she was homeless and was possibly just trying to get some relief from the cold. We weren't technically supposed to let people loiter in or around the store, but this occurrence seemed pretty harmless to me. The next night, I was sitting behind the counter, getting drowsy and wishing the sun would come up so I could go home and try to get some rest. I was watching a TV show on my iPad around, I think, 4 a.m. when I heard the bell ring. I'm pretty sure I jumped out of my chair as I had been dozing in and out of sleep, startled and trying to regain my composure. I looked at the door to see who had entered, and it was the same woman from the night before. She looked almost exactly the same, except now there seemed to be several scrapes or scratches on her face. I greeted her and asked if there was anything I could help her with. Again, no response, and she began the process of walking up and down the aisles, with her head down. I figured I was going to have to wait a minute or two and then let her know that if she wasn't planning on buying anything, she would have to leave the store. Once a few minutes passed and I informed her, she stopped directly where she was standing, stared at me, and said, "The only thing worth bargaining for is your soul." Her voice was high and shrill, not at all what I expected. I responded by saying, "Excuse me?" She didn't say anything else. She just stared at me with a menacing, almost aggressive look. After about 30 seconds, she exited the store, and I watched her walk across the parking lot, hoping she wouldn't come back. The final night of my consecutive overnights came all too quickly, and all I could think about was hoping that this crazy woman wouldn't show up again tonight. I never really had anxiety related to this job, so for the first time I was uneasy about heading into work. I couldn't really focus on anything during my shift other than staring at the door and waiting for customers to enter. I didn't really leave the register, even though I probably could have done some stocking throughout the store. The clock seemed to be moving so slow. It was only 3 a.m., and I felt like I had been there for 12 hours. Shortly after 3 a.m., I heard the bell ring, and there she was, the same woman from the 2 previous nights. She looked even more disheveled, and the cuts on her face had increased and were also noticeable on her hands. Her hands almost seemed red, like they were smeared with blood. I looked over at her and yelled, "Are you okay? Can I get you some help?" Meanwhile, I was really only concerned with my own safety. She looked up in my direction and mouthed the words, "Help me," and it looked like she started to cry. I told her to hold on and went down to my purse to grab my cell phone to contact someone. I found my cell phone and was getting ready to dial 911, but then I heard the bell again, and the door opened. When I looked up, she was gone. I didn't even see her scurry across the parking lot. It was that quick. I decided to call my boss, not knowing what else to do. I clearly woke him up, but he seemed attentive when I explained what transpired during the previous 3 nights. He decided to come in and talk to me and check the property to see if we could locate her. When he arrived, he went to the back to check the video recordings to see if he could get a visual or description of the person in case we decided to contact the authorities, since someone had entered our store clearly in trouble and not in the right mental state. He came back up front about 10 minutes later with a scowl on his face. "Hand me the phone." "I'm calling the cops," he said in a very serious tone. "What?" I asked, startled and slightly worried that she might be back. "Come look at this," he said, leading me back to the surveillance room. He proceeded to rewind the footage that was overlooking the back of the building near the bathrooms. Upon playing it, I watched as the old woman walked onto the screen, facing directly towards the store, seemingly out of nowhere. Her slow demeanor became explosive as she began aggressively thrusting her shoulders into the bricks of the building, falling to her knees, and intermittently scratching at her face in the store. She proceeded in this psychotic state for nearly 2 minutes straight before she wandered off-screen towards the front of the store, entering towards me. The timing lined up directly with when I remembered seeing her. I was in mild shock with my hand over my mouth as my boss informed me about experiences he's had with various junkies in the past, explaining that some of them seem borderline possessed, with no rhyme or reason for their actions. We ended up reporting the incidents and showing the footage to a few patrolmen, but there wasn't much they could do besides reassuring us that they'd keep an officer patrolling the area for the next couple of evenings. The way that woman moved still baffles my mind. Looking back, her asking for help really made me wish there was something I could have done for her. But needless to say, I haven't worked the night shift in quite some time. My friends and I loved playing outside during the winter. Our parents didn't mind how long we were out, and it was the best time of year for some of our favorite games. Our twin friends, let's call them Ava and Andy for the sake of the story, have a beautiful home with tons of land on the property. There were at least 5 acres of forest located directly behind the house. When we got together at their place, we would all play games like Manhunt or even just hide and seek if we couldn't agree on anything else. On the day of this particular incident, we all gathered at Ava and Andy's house to play hide and seek. We had a snow day from school, and my parents dropped a bunch of us off so we could hang out. The group decided to play hide and seek that day, so my friend Danielle and I made the choice to hide in the woods, which was a pretty common hiding spot for our games. We ran out further than we usually did, but since it was daytime, we weren't worried. We always made sure we could see the edge of the woods, so we wouldn't get lost. As we made our way back, we veered to the left, hoping we could spot whoever was looking for us and sneak out before being caught. However, we noticed what appeared to be a small wooden structure, something like a cross between an outhouse and a small shed. Curiosity got the better of us, and we walked up to it for a closer look. We had to kick some snow and ice off the door to open it, but once we got inside, we were greeted with a bizarre sight. Hanging on the walls was an assortment of strange metal objects, traps, or at least that's what they looked like to me. They didn't resemble anything I had ever seen before. The metal had what appeared to be blood or perhaps just dark rust on it. My first thought was that the whole thing looked like something out of the Saw movies, just a bunch of twisted tools that seemed designed for sinister purposes. We immediately slammed the door shut and hurried back to the house, not caring anymore about losing the game of hide and seek. When we got back, we asked Ava and Andy, "Do you know there's a creepy shed in the woods on your property, filled with some weird stuff?" Andy responded casually, "Oh yeah, that's just our dad's hunting stuff. He doesn't like keeping it in the house, so he stores it out there." Danielle and I kind of dismissed it, but I still felt unsettled. My dad has hunted all my life, and I had never seen him with anything that even resembled what I saw in that shed. That night, my curiosity got the better of me, and I tried Googling the traps I had seen. I spent a long time searching, but I couldn't find anything that matched what was burned into my memory. The following weekend, we went back to Ava and Andy's house. After a few hours of drinking hot chocolate and hanging out in the living room, we decided to play manhunt again. Just as Danielle and I were heading outside, Ava and Andy's father approached us. "I heard you found my shed," he said in a somber voice. We both nodded, trying to be polite. He then leaned down closer to us, his tone suddenly more aggressive, and said, "That's my shed. Don't go in there again, and if I find you out there, there will be trouble." Then he walked away into another room. This was weird, because their father had always been super nice to us. He treated us with respect, so this was completely out of character. When we joined the others outside, I couldn't stop thinking about the shed. I decided to hide by myself and sneak a look at it from a distance, hoping no one would notice. But when I got close enough to see it, I realized something was different. 3 industrial-sized padlocks had been added to the door, which hadn't been there the previous week. To this day, I'm still not sure what those traps were or what they were used for. Was Ava and Andy's dad just being cautious about us messing with dangerous hunting gear, or was he hiding something far more sinister? I live in the northern United States, in a state that borders Canada. In my hometown, there's an old, supposedly abandoned military base. Back when I was in high school, rumors were always flying around that it wasn't actually abandoned. Some said that dangerous cults held meetings there, others believed the homeless had taken over the compound for shelter. Any bizarre story you could imagine seemed to be tied to this place. One freezing January night, my 3 friends and I decided to locate the base and explore it for ourselves. After some research, we figured out where it was, but it wasn't easy to find, as it's deep in a forest and fenced off. We probably never would have stumbled across it if my friend John hadn't noticed a small, old "No Trespassing" sign sticking out from a dirt driveway. It was worn down and looked pretty ancient, so we ignored it and continued. We drove down a dirt road for a few minutes before reaching a closed gate covered in "No Trespassing" and "No Entry under Government Law" signs. At that point, we debated whether to turn back or keep going. John and I were all for pushing forward, while the others were hesitant. In the end, curiosity won out. John got out of the car and lifted the gate so we could drive through. The road beyond was winding, with twists and turns that seemed to go on forever. Snow flurries swirled around us as we slowly drove along, passing odd items strewn along the roadside, beds, dressers, and unopened boxes of food, all of which were being ruined by the snow. It didn't look like trash, though. It was as if the items had been placed there recently. After a few more minutes, we reached the base. It wasn't what we expected. There were 3 buildings. One looked like an old apartment building with rows of windows, the second was a tall building with a huge satellite dish on top, and the third resembled a church with large crosses on its double doors. Vines and moss covered the buildings, making them appear untouched for years. Despite our unease, we convinced ourselves the place was abandoned. Eventually, John broke the silence by saying, "I didn't come this far just to sit in the car. I'm going to look around." Trying not to seem scared, I joined him while our other 2 friends stayed in the car. We entered the first building, which was unlocked. The lights didn't work, so we used flashlights to navigate. The atmosphere was eerie. Despite looking abandoned, the place was surprisingly intact. Beds were still made, dressers were shut, and there was even artwork on the walls. After exploring for a bit, we decided to check out the next building with the large satellite. This one was locked tight, and no amount of banging or searching revealed another entrance. With no luck, we moved on to the third building, the church. By this point, I was feeling paranoid, constantly hearing noises, and having the uneasy sensation that we weren't alone. We entered the church, which was a mess. Books and papers were scattered everywhere, but none of them made sense to me, just a bunch of letters and numbers in what seemed like military code. There was no religious imagery except for one cross on the back wall. Just as we were about to leave, John noticed a door in the floor that led to a lower level. I knew we probably shouldn't open it, but curiosity got the better of us. The door revealed a ladder leading down a hallway lit by orange lights, much like the ones in parking garages. We climbed down and cautiously walked to the end of the hallway, where we found a door with a small window. Peeking in, we saw a group of 8 men, all in suits, sitting around a table. One of the men noticed us almost immediately. We ducked down, but within seconds, the orange lights in the hallway turned red. Panic set in. We sprinted back to the ladder, and as we climbed up, we heard a door slam and footsteps echoing down the hallway. We bolted to the car, and as soon as we jumped in, we sped out of there as fast as we could. As we hit the main road, we saw what we thought were headlights or flashlights coming through the trees. For months after, we felt like we were constantly looking over our shoulders, waiting for the cops or someone else to show up at our doors. But nothing ever happened. It's been 12 years since that night, and while nothing ever came of it, I still wonder what we stumbled upon. John thinks it was a secret government base, but I'm not so sure. It didn't feel like a cult either, but who knows? To this day, I still think about it and wonder, what did we find? Should I still be looking over my shoulder? Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.